Okay, so I'll start. This is a talk actually I'd given at the Mumbai Surgical Society meeting a couple of months ago. It's just between Ahem and I, we had decided to do a section on how to write a paper, how to publish, and how to present a paper. I think the other things were how to present a poster, and there was one more, how to make a surgical video, if I'm not mistaken. So disclosures as I start off, I have no conflicts of interest to declare. I'm not on any company's payroll. I am not the foremost expert in writing up a paper. I am still learning the process of writing myself, and I have faced far more rejections than I'd like to admit. And the acceptances actually have been lesser than rejections. So that's what I'd like to disclose as I start off. Some of the basic reasons to focus on, especially for the residents, is why are we writing? Usually the situation is either a boss has asked you to, a colleague or friend is doing it, you think it's cool, you must because you heard that that's important for your promotion or career advancement. We've all heard this phrase, publish or perish. There's an unnecessary and probably an overweight sort of emphasis on publication. So hence we should. And the last reason probably should be the first, but I think currently it is the last, is because you actually want to or feel like. So where do you start? I think this is important and often missed. I think when a topic is thrust upon us, it's easy to actually start there because some senior or some mentor is actually told you to write, about the particular topic. It's also easy when there's something which is a hot topic or the in thing. Ahem will forgive me. A lot like AWR was a couple of years ago. It was the thing everybody was interested in. But it could be something like that. It could be of genuine interest to you. And this bottom last thing that I mentioned, it happened to you. So a lot of the times, I think we have actual clinical situations like in the ward or in a patient interaction. I always use this example while saying that, an average patient who comes up for a liver transplant to me and is posted for a cadaver liver always asks me, so, Doc, how much time would it take for me to get a liver? And it's something, rather than giving an educated guess, someone needs to. Okay, good. Thank you. So, rather than giving an educated guess, I often, I often use these situations to set up a protocol or set up a, research project, because it's you can even use questions put to you by your colleagues, your seniors, or your patients to start off a research project, which may be big or small, depending on the scale of the practice where you're at. Selecting the topic, it's better that we narrow down to a focal point. Like if I use that patient question as a sort of an inspiration to write my paper as to what is the average wait time for a liver in the city of Mumbai for a cadaver listing patient, then the focal point should be just that, exactly that. The research focus should be, what is the average wait time that a patient who is listed for a transplant on a particular day in a year before he gets the liver? So the research question, again, is on the same lines, because it's always it's good to have one research question that you're answering. And if it's actually a hypothesis, that if it's like a comparative study where you're comparing two forms of treatment or two sort of interventions, it's always good to have a hypothesis formed way in advance to understand whether it's worth investigating and what sort of study you'll be designing before you write this paper. So this is again in the phase of actually designing your research study. So everybody knows that there are various types: the case control, case series, cohort, randomized control trials. In terms of research, you even in addition to this, you even have meta-analysis and reviews. So obviously those are either invited articles, or if you have been publishing extensively in the field, you can actually think about writing a review of all your previous publications, or all the previous publications in the public domain at that point. So I would say is that we must review a research question again at this stage when you are designing your study, and assess the best way you could answer that question. So if it is just a wait time question that I had for my patients, I could do a simple prospective observational study to see how, say, 100 listed patients, how long they have to wait, average out the times, and be ready for the next time a patient asks me in the OPD, how long does it take, with the average figure, which would be which would be at least a reasonable figure to give that patient. And obviously at this time, consulting people who've already done extensively designed studies before you or published before you is a good way to start. I would advise a good phase of diligence before actually writing the paper. It's fair to read about your topic thoroughly. I cannot overemphasize this. We must read and read about the topic you're going to write about. Everything in the existing literature, at least in terms of reviews, meta-analysis, high quality of evidence, should be reviewed before you embark on writing your own paper. PubMed, I think all of us are well aware of. PubMed is a great resource, but there are finer ways to review, and with medical subject headings, with the keywords, with actually even down to institute names and researcher names, if you know some, to actually research your topic. So interview and interact with people who have published material in your domain, in the domain. Sometimes you know them, sometimes you don't. You take out a corresponding author, send them an actual mail, and you must keep a track of all your services. You must keep track of all your services and sources of where you have sourced your material. I would archive all of that material in something as simple as just folders on your computer, if nothing else. Say if I'm doing this transplant study to find out the average wait times, then I have a folder which goes like liver transplant wait time study, and everything I find related to this can be stored in that even before I've started writing. And always take notes. I have this diary that I write my notes in. As I read or as I brainstorm, ideas come and go. Sometimes you don't exactly know what has triggered off that idea. You may forget it a couple of days later when you're sitting down to actually write it. So maintain a record of those ideas. What is desirable, even if you start, this is just before your paper, is to potentially identify a journal you may eventually want to publish in, so that you can actually read up their guidelines, because that helps in formulating the article a lot. And I would say that please make notes and read when you read in your own words. It helps put in the original content in your paper eventually. So it may also be desirable if you are planning a prospective study, an RCT, to register study protocols. So this is one thing which we often forget in the Indian setting. A lot of researchers do not register study protocols. There are Indian government websites where you can register study protocols. You can register study protocols if you feel like, even in clinicaltrials.gov, which is a National Library of Medicine USA based website. Please, even prospective studies, seek institutional review board meetings or ethics committee clearances prior to enrollment in your study. There are certain studies in which you get up to 6 months of leeway after the starting of your study to seek permissions from the review board, but make sure that you have that certificate with you. There are certain journals that may do random audits now and ask you for this. If you don't have it, it looks bad, because if you quote a prospective study without having this, it's frowned upon. And preserve all records pertaining to data collection. There have been incidences when having this data handy helps. So at this point, I think I'm going to make an assumption that you designed the study, you have collected the data, and you've done a review of literature to synthesize information so that you can start writing. So when you actually start writing, I think as in the type of article, you decided whether you're going to do an original article, which may be a full-length methodology research like a RCT. It could be case report, a case series. It could be letters or rapid communication to the editors in response to a previous publication, or reviews, which could be systematic or narrative. You must select a journal at this phase, since it's good to know where you're going to publish, and obviously identify the audience that the journal caters to. There are several journals which may belong to broad specialty broad specialties, like maybe like a physician society or a surgeon society, and then you have narrow specialty journals which may focus to the narrow specialty. It's very important to identify the audience, because they'll have varying levels of knowledge about the topic that you want to publish. I would say right at the outset, it's good to kind of outline your paper, formulate broad headings under which the paper will be written. The most common one we all know is IMRAD, Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. That's the format which is probably even endorsed by the International Council of Medical Journal Editors, and it's widely used and recognized. You may have to rearrange it for certain journals depending on the journal specific guidelines and the target audience. Obviously, at this point, it's before you actually start to write the particular sections in, it's good to ask for the more experienced members of your team to review the broader guideline. Again, I'd like to emphasize to think about the audience before you start actually writing. Go through the instruction of authors. This is freely available on the journal's website, and most journals have their own unique set of instructions for word limits, reference formats, number of tables, graphs, and illustrations. Save yourself from getting rejected because you wrote the entire article and you didn't go through the instructions with a fine-tooth comb, because even the copy editors who receive your article would reject it just for that simple reason that it doesn't match their format. It is also some instruction for authors in some journals like the NEJM and the Annals of Surgery is they're great resources to even learn how to write articles, because they have some great links, and some publishers like Elsevier even have author academies which you can sign up for and learn to write in the structured format. So the article structure broadly, you have to have a title, decide your authors, the author order, an abstract, and keywords. They need to be accurate, and the information needs to be precise, because this is how your article gets indexed, and how it gets indexed is how it's going to be searched and how it's going to be read, and then how it's going to be cited. So very important aspects: title, authors, abstracts, keywords. The main text, each of the subsections, like we discussed, has a specific function which I'll be going through. Acknowledgements are for people who help you construct the article or collect the data but do not mount up to authorship criteria. It will come to referencing after that, the style depends on the journal specific to which you are publishing in, and then supplementary materials in case of your publication demands that you have videos, chart, or appendices along with your manuscript. So again, when it comes to the order of actually writing the subsections, I follow a different order. You'll have personal preferences as you write more and more, you'll develop your own preference, but I prefer this order. I write my methods first, the results later, discussion, conclusion, and introduction, my abstract and title in the end. I will go through why this format appeals to me. I think you start with your methods. It's simple, because I think if you describe how you carried out your study first, that's probably the easiest thing to get out of the way. It has to provide enough information so that the reader or a potential set of readers can reproduce your methods and potentially achieve the same results. Obviously, that's a caveat. They may or may not, but it has to be enough descriptive so that they can reproduce your methods. There are guidelines available for this, again, sanctioned by the medical journal editors group. Some of them are Consort and Prisma, depending on the type of articles you're writing. Usually in the method section, you define your study population, define the procedure, instruments, and timeframes of data collection, and any analytical methods you use to analyze the data you collected. After the methods, I actually go on to results, because again, you remember that you're writing the article after you've finished the data collection part of your study. So at this point, also I'm also assuming that you've analyzed this data. So it's good to compile your results in a way that is easy to understand. You must give it structure by dividing the results section into subsections like demographics for your patient population, pre and post intervention statistics, the methods that you used, what was the yield, how many patients were operated, not operated, whatever the subject of your research study may be. It's obviously a given that you must use figures and tables to summarize your data. And again, a guide for the residents. It's only important to show the results of your analysis. The methodology actually that you use to arrive at that is not important to be shown in your article. And another thing that we should save ourselves from is not to duplicate data between tables and figures and the text. So they can be standalone from each other. Things that you mention in a table need not come up in the text again, and vice versa. So use the journal guidelines for specifications for figures, charts, and tables, especially if you're using your own illustrations. Please go through illustration guide in the instruction for authors section. Use effective captioning. Usually the caption should stand alone in a way that the figure can be understood without having to go back and forth from the manuscript. That's usually advisable. Use of color depends on the type of journal that you're publishing in. Most of them now do allow color, and photograph guidelines in terms of the DPI, pixelation, resolution, etc. all are mentioned in the instruction of authors. You must, I would say, kind of have a familiarity with the basics of statistics. Even though advanced knowledge, I think we should take as a biostatistician, but the basics must be understood. And at least summary statistics like mean, median, mode, standard deviation, quartile ranges should be something that you are familiar with. Then I actually, after finishing the methods and the results, I come on to the discussion. You'll note that I still haven't spoken about the introduction because I don't write the introduction yet. I'll tell you the order in which this is the order in which I go. I actually write the discussion after writing the methods and the results. It's probably the most important part of your paper. This part will be the one that will be the most widely read. It'll often sell your paper to the journal and readers. So what basically you need to cover in this part is, what do your results mean? Why were your methods successful? Then why were your methods successful? You can have a hypothesis, which either you discuss whether it was proved or disproved. And it's a good idea to actually measure on how the studies that you carried out compared with the others in the field. You must be open to fall on your own sword and kind of discuss the limitations of your studies. All of the studies will have limitations. It's best to be upfront about them and mention them in your discussion yourself, rather than having a reviewer or a reader point them out later. There are some things I stay away from in discussion. Do not reiterate results. There's no need to state the result again in a sentence before you go on to explain what it means. You assume that the reader has been reading the article in a flow, and he always knows what you're referring to when you're actually discussing your results. It's very important to not make sweeping statements like, my method proves that method XYZ is obsolete. That's not how we that's not how facts should be put forward. Grand generalization and tall claims should not be made, even though if you think your treatment modality is path breaking, potentially can win you a Nobel. I don't think any Nobel winning paper has made generalizations like those. It's best to leave those sort of impact of your paper in to the reader, but just present and discuss your findings in very general language. Do not overtly claim to support or refute previous publications. I would say present conflicting data in a neutral light, leaving it again to the reader to decide. And you can make, however, you do have the freedom to make speculations and hypotheses, given that you mention that out to the reader that you are speculating or you are giving a hypothesis. But it's best to keep them rooted in reality. Sometimes the journal may ask for a separate section on conclusions. Several journals don't have, and kind of club this together with the discussion. This section should bring the reader to the logical end of, his research exercise. I mean, usually it's the reader who has a research question, has come on to the internet, logged on to PubMed, and has come across your article with a research question in mind. If he's reading if he or her is reading that article with that research question in mind, the conclusion ideally should have an answer to that research question. You should try to do it as briefly as possible. You must go on again and to describe how the given article advances the knowledge in the domain that you're published in and its potential applications, if there are any. And you can have the liberty of suggesting future directions in the field or any advanced research in the same domain that may further the cause or further the conclusions that you have arrived at. It's at this phase, actually, after the discussion, I like to write my introduction. Since you've written the bulk of the paper now, I think it's easier to write the introduction at this stage. There may be people who differ with me, that's fine. This is just how I do it. It's because I'm introducing, now that I've written the bulk of the paper, it's easy for me to introduce the content of my matter in the first paragraph. It's always easy to introduce someone after you know them. So I would describe the problem statement, give a problem statement trying to introduce the reader to the problem I'm trying to solve. Describe again what you're trying to achieve. You may even state the hypothesis, but not the fact that you've proven or disproven it yet, because you're just presenting your hypothesis to the reader. And also in brief, you can go over things that have already been done and achieved in the past. So that you set up a sort of set up the reader to read your article. Do not again make this a history lesson. It's very important to remember that, you know, you are writing for the scientific community. A lot of them already may be familiar with the research topic you're writing about. So if say you are writing about anterior abdominal wall hernias in a hernia journal, do not start with the anterior abdominal or anatomy. It's not cool. Everybody who's probably reading that article knows the anterior abdominal wall anatomy. Stay away from doing that. Do not repeat what you've written in discussion in the introduction, especially when you follow the order that I follow. It's very tempting to do that. Just present the discussion facts in a different way. That's not to be done. And again, don't forget to cite the relevant and recent work in the introduction itself, even though it contradicts your work, or because you may not actually discuss the contradiction right now, but you may, in an effort to kind of write what has already been published, you may have to quote something that contradicts your work, and that's fine. You don't have to include only articles that agree with your work. It's okay to quote contradicting articles. Another important part about writing, since now you've done the IMRAD body of your manuscript, another important is citations. So I prefer to cite while I write, because I find it extremely difficult to kind of do that after the article is written. There are a lot of breaks if you wait to write citations after you've written the entire thing. So I kind of cite while I write. I use softwares like EndNote. There are other softwares available like Mendeley. There is another one called Cite While You Write itself, but it's, again, these are free and paid depending on the version you want. I actually start using them very early on when I'm doing the diligence for my papers itself. I start inserting references and try to prepare a bibliography, and then depending on which paper I need, I'll start introducing my citations. It's best to introduce a citation right from the first draft. There can be a lot of juggling in the order. These software managers obviously help you in that. And when you are repeating citations or sort of citing the same paper in different sections of your manuscript, be careful not to repeat the citation. Just quote the same number again. And the citations part would be part of your final review of the paper. They always have to be, because sometimes it's funny how they can be a source of errors in, you know, submitted manuscripts. I actually write my abstract after I finish even my references, because I think the abstract is the last thing I actually write in the entire paper. And this is, again, the same logic as the introduction, because the abstract is actually the one that's indexed and going to be most widely read. So I want to lure the reader in to kind of read the full text of my manuscript at this point. So the abstract can be two types. It can be descriptive or structured. Descriptives are usually used in review articles where you know, the author kind of goes over what he has reviewed, and the structured format is more for your RCTs, where even the abstract is broken down into the IMRAD format. And do remember keywords. Again, it's very important. You can use the medical subject heading guidelines available at the PubMed website, but because these are words that will be used to index your study. So every time someone searches for this word, your study will come up. So remember to choose wisely, because those keywords improve the visibility of your article. A good abstract should be precise, standalone. It cannot use a lot of technical jargon, because sometimes it's even read by lay public. PubMed is accessible to everybody, remember. Do minimize the use of abbreviations. Only abbreviations that are widely used and common are okay. Don't use citations here, and use it to sell your article. A title in the keywords, a short note about that, should be concise, apt, and complete. It is the main attraction. It does attract a lot of attention to your article. Do not use unnecessary jargon. Avoid a long title, specifically if you're writing a randomized control trial. Avoid using that as a suffix, like, you know, blah blah blah, a randomized control trial. Not needed. Keywords, again, as I said, important, because your article is indexed based on that. And the use of mesh terms, again, the same way as we've been hyping. The general considerations to be followed by writing a paper: perform a thorough grammar and spell check once you finish writing your paper in the word processing software that you choose to use. Use a uniform language. These word processing softwares like Microsoft Word usually have British or American English, depending on the journal preference. Some journals do mention preferences in terms of the language. It's important to be brief and clear. Brevity, clarity, paramount. Do not repeat facts, avoid redundancy, ambiguity, and do not exaggerate. remember that a paper is a report of the research you have performed, hence use the past tense. So I think that's a feature which a lot of the authors forget while writing papers. They use the present tense to describe what they have been doing, but it's important to use things, more words like had or reported or showed, does not shows, because this is a report of what you have performed in the past. So use the past tense. You can use language editing softwares and language or services that are freely or paid available. Up to you. I do my own, but everybody is to each his own. If you feel comfortable, use it. Avoid plagiarism at all costs. I cannot emphasize this more. A lot of the people think that writing a paper is just about, copying, pasting, and using other previously written papers as a template. Please avoid doing that. It's not only, I think, the word-to-word plagiarism is a thing of the past, and I think nobody right now does an exact word-to-word copy of previous articles. A lot of them use the structure of previous articles to get inspired, but I would stay away from that. Try to use them as references alone. Try to describe the finding of your study in your own language. Do not paraphrase, even if you're citing the original study. Try to say the same fact in your own words. It helps. It helps maintain originality. And another thing that we must prevent ourselves from doing is fabricating and falsifying data. That this is the most immoral thing to do. As someone who's presenting your data or publishing your scientific work, I think it's very tempting to, beef up the numbers and falsify data to make the paper look good. But trust me, it's not wise. It sells a preconceived notion. It helps you arrive to a preconceived conclusion. It's not right. Remember that someone may actually read your paper and replicate your methods and may fail to achieve the conclusion because you yourself have fabricated data to reach there. So I think if we assume the moral responsibility of originality, even if a treatment modality were to show no effect, it's fine. So articles where a retraction has been published, or articles where a method has shown to be shown inferior than the existing model also get published, because that also is important data for the medical community. So don't worry about arriving a conclusion or not. Publish the data you feel that should be out there in the scientific community, but please be honest. So at this point, congratulations. If you've reached so far, you've actually published the first draft of your paper. I would suggest a detailed review, some editing from all the other team members, especially the senior colleagues. Just be careful who you share your intellectual property with. Intellectual property rights and awareness of intellectual property in India is very low. A lot of people get too inspired. So do not share your material with people like that who may call it their own. Be careful who you're sharing your intellectual property with. You want to retain IP rights over your material. So at this point, you have selected the journal, you understood its submission process, you have all the required, a lot of journals have forms and permission slips that you need filled, everything is filled, you've arranged for funds for the publication fees in case that's needed. You have the authorship and the author order in mind. A lot of residents will remember that this point may include a lot of honorary author mention names, even though I heavily frown upon it. You may have to do it. It's the nature of the game. If that's what it takes, it's fine. Have a cover letter ready where you are again selling to the editor of the journal why you are submitting that article to their journal. Again, at this point, just before submission, I would emphasize that you review the guidelines of authors to see if you've not missed anything. And then again, a final read of your manuscript before you hit the submit button. Once you've actually submitted it, it's, I mean, most of you must be familiar with the online editorial managers. It's pretty simple. It's just one thing after the other. You just keep submitting all the parts of your manuscript. It's best to remember to submit only to one journal at a time, even though that journal may take time. The turnaround time for that journal may be long. Stick to one journal till you get a decision from that. Once the decision arrives, your next phase will start, and there is another phase post a decision from the journal. It could be accepted without revisions, and great, your article is accepted. They could ask for minor revisions, major revisions. It may be unacceptable in its current form, but they may reconsider if you change it or alter it in some form. It's the journal editor is kind enough to tell you that it's unacceptable in any form, so then you can focus on another journal. And they think it's unsuitable for publication in their journal. So, or which means that you may have selected a journal which addresses a specialty which may not benefit a lot of information that you from the one that you're trying to share. So they may say that it's unsuitable for publication in our journal, and some authors, some editors even guide you to a journal which may probably be suited better to receive your article. So what are the post-review revisions? Usually I would respond to the reviewer comments one by one, even if you disagree with them. Provide a sound reasoning to as a rebuttal to the points that the reviewer makes. Accept valid criticism, make the changes. No one is small for doing so, and usually helps. It helps placate even aggressive reviewer. And obviously use the exact page, paragraph, and line numbers while responding. It always helps. uh, what to do if you are rejected from a particular journal. Remember, it's totally normal. All of us have faced that. Try and understand why the paper was rejected. Good editors and journals will actually explain to you why they turned the manuscript down. If you make those changes, there's a good chance that the manuscript may be accepted. And once you have made those particular changes, try to resubmit it in another journal. And uh, remember, when you submit to a new journal, go through the new journal's instructions just to make sure that your article is still in the format that that new journal accepts. So in case you do get accepted, congratulate yourself. You must celebrate. You do not forget to publicize your word. Use social media to spread it, your article, get more reads, get more citations. They are important assets. Eventually, when we all start publishing, it's the number of citations that will distinguish one published person from another. And important to remember with the use of social media, and especially things like ResearchGate, do network and respond to reader queries and criticism. It only improves the visibility of your article and your own visibility as your researcher capacity. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks so much. That was superb, man. So if anybody has any questions or comments, you guys can unmute yourselves or use the raise hand option that's there on Zoom. Okay, so while people are getting their thoughts together, I have a few things I'd like to discuss with you. The first thing is author order is usually a pretty touchy topic in our part of the world. And unlike the West, where senior authors usually land up taking the last few positions in the author orders, the guys who do the least amount of work on the manuscript are usually amongst the first few, right?
Right.
So what's your take on that? I mean, are we seeing any cultural shift right now, or is that something we're going to have to live with?
So with the new emphasis on publication, even for promotions at the job place, so all our associate professors are now evaluated on the basis of their publications for promotions. So I think the pressure from the top is going to be there, even though there is no real contribution from the top in writing the article. I think I would navigate little carefully. Some of our seniors can be very resentful. I wouldn't want to cross hairs with them just for just to maintain the order. So I would not get too hung up over it, but you could potentially get a sense about how your seniors are. If they are open-minded and you can talk to them, I would say stick to the author order that sounds legitimate and fair. If you put in the most work, if it's your idea, if you meet first authorship criteria, you should be first author. A senior, technically the senior guiding professor, guiding light, mentor, ideally should accept the position in the last, because if any researcher of prominence nowadays from anywhere, the group is recognized as his group. So if I were to say that if you're a researcher of prominence, actually putting your name now in the end is so much like common, that I would say that a first author is almost always equated with as a resident, a medical student, or an early careers person who's trying to look for his advancement. So to the broader global audience, it's wiser if the senior names are in the end. But for reasons that I mentioned before, if your senior members want to go first, I would navigate that interaction very carefully, because you don't want to be at the end of a resentful senior. That's a bad workplace equation.
All right. So I actually have one more thing to run by you. So there are a lot of residents on the group right now, and usually they'll come up asking for different journals
Right.
that they can submit a particular manuscript to. And I usually ask them to aim really high.
Right.
And what I mean by aiming high is ensure that there's a decent enough impact factor, but more than anything, ensure that it's PubMed indexed.
Correct.
I know that PubMed indexing is not this sort of proxy for the quality of the journal itself, but would you say it's fair to, at this point in time, at least try to publish in PubMed index journals, or is that a moot point?
So I would err towards publishing in PubMed journals. So, I may be completely different from what the norm is nowadays, but I do not believe in populating the publication field of your CV. I think there's been a movement where people think that it's just okay to have like that, have your number of publications as 10, 15, doesn't matter the quality that you publish in. To me, as someone who probably sits on a recruiting board or a fellowship examination board or something that is looking to hire someone, if I look at your CV and I see 20 publications, none of which have any value in terms of the scientific value, they're not published in good journals, they're not indexed, it actually tells me that you've taken the easy route. You've conducted poor research and published in poor journals or predatory journals, and it actually tells me that as a worker, you probably prefer to take the easier route and do things easier, which makes me feel like I shouldn't recruit you as a fellow, as a resident, or as your job. So to me, and I think there are people like me, I would poorly conducted and published research speaks against you. No research, nothing done is okay. It's still okay if I have a good recommendation or if I know people who he's worked with in the past. I can probably still accept someone like that. But if they have done only poor research just to populate the research field, it actually shows me that you've taken the easier route and you're probably someone I would not like to associate with. I may be harsh, it may sound harsh, but I think stay away from predatory journals, stay away from low quality publications that don't add any research value. You may do two projects a year, you may do one project a year, you may do one project in 3 years, but if it's worth publishing, if you publish in a high impact factor PubMed index journal, it always speaks volumes of your ethic and your ethos as a research person. And remember that a lot of the institutes, like potential bosses, potential places of work will look you up on PubMed. So if you appear on PubMed searches as an author because you have published there, it always speaks volumes for you before your interview even. So in that context, stick to in PubMed index journals, stick to high quality publications. The number really doesn't matter. There may be differing opinions on this. To me, number does not matter, quality matters.
So just one small point on that. I think the number matters in the way that you said that a lot of people will look you up on PubMed, right? So if I am speaking with someone about the sort of work they've done, and if they tell me they've written 15 papers, out of which so many were case series, and if I run a quick PubMed search and I find only 2 papers on PubMed, I'm a very judgmental person. I'm going to think,
Absolutely.
okay, so where are the other 13 papers?
It's exactly what I'm trying to say. I mean, I'm not saying numbers don't matter at all.
But there should be some sort of correlation between what you're conveying and what the actual hard facts are.
Correct. But see, I would not do that. I would not quote the number that I have not published on PubMed. Have I published in journals?
That's a smart move.
Correct. Which have I published in journals which are not on PubMed? Yes. In the beginning of my career, I did, because I just needed that number to push up a certain thing. But later, I've become wiser. Now I don't publish in non-PubMed index journals because I realized that it's easy. Sometimes it conveys the wrong information. People have started realizing that that can actually work against you. So I stay away from it. I advise all the young residents to stay away from it. And when I say numbers don't matter, I mean in front of quality. I would not mind them having 2 publications in good journals rather than 6 publications in predatory journals where even a cow can publish.
All right, that makes sense, man. Do we have any questions or comments?
Yeah, Ahem.
Hey, Anmol, what's going on?
Yeah, man? Hi, Ahem and Dr. Aditya. Very nice talk. So, the point you have made just now is very valid, and I really want to highlight it, because most of the time, what happens is during your post graduation and all, the bosses, they ask you to publish your thesis work.
Right.
Most of the thesis work is full of bullshit. Everybody knows that. You take 20 cases, then multiply it by 20, maybe 10 cases multiplied by 5, maybe 0 cases.
Yeah.
So all those work, and then I met a colleague few years back, and I asked. I had only one publication by that time. I asked how many publications the person had, and the person had around 15 publications. So I
Right.
came back and searched all the publications, and they were in like XYZ type of journals.
Right.
So the point is, today I have only 5 publications. All the 5 are in this obesity surgery one, and the kind of traction I have got in my career from those publications,
Yeah.
it's like I cannot judge people judge on that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's very important to have a publication in a good journal. Not and
Absolutely.
PubMed. Yes, I will always guide anybody to publish in a PubMed journal only, because PubMed index journal, because anybody, like, even if I have to search a topic, where I'll be searching that topic first, that's
Yeah.
going to be PubMed. It's not going to be
It's going to give your article way more reach
Yeah.
than if you publish it in some obscure journal somewhere.
and the feeling of your article getting cited by a good author, or maybe in his presentation, nothing can match that.
Absolutely.
So that is not going to come
Yeah.
if you read. I was reading about this AWR thing, some writing a review. So there were a lot of journals, XYZ, writing everything. It's not useful. We're just
True.
bringing
agree
down the
with that.
quality.
See, I think eventually when, a lot of people or a critical number of people are going to start publishing things like H-index, things like citations, things like how many papers did you publish in the last 5 years? All of them are start going to, like, in that range for heavily published authors, that's going to start mattering if
Yes.
you are competing for the same job. So I would suggest keeping the quality high right from the beginning. Even if the quantity is less, you can always stand up for your work. I think when I published in better journals, I could stand up for my work far more than if I had published in weaker journals. So I completely agree with you. One good publication is equal to 5
Yes.
questionable publications.
I think this is more related to because of the government sector and the eventual increase in the private medical colleges, because they have these guidelines. You want to become a associate professor, you need to have 10 publication, and then they start, and that is the reason why this authorship problem occurs.
Right.
First.
Right.
So we're talking so much about residency and postgraduate dissertations. I'll tell you, I feel very strongly about thesis topics as such, because it's a young clinician's first foray into clinical research. And I think where we are failing our residents is by not inculcating the sort of ethical practices in conducting research. We don't give them the tools how to put words to their work. And we're kind of leaving them high and dry. So we need to spend a little more time in the first couple of years rather than suddenly wake up 6 months before the dissertation is due and then try to push them to collect random data. And then the pressure adds up to publish. But is it something that's adding to world literature, or is it actually just adding to the confusion?
Correct. I think it's also important, why I had an entire section about emphasizing about designing your studies, because I think where the plot is lost is where people want to start publishing at a stage where after they've conducted their thesis or their dissertation, they start like, oh, how do I publish it? The idea is you missed the boat. The boat arrived at the point when you were designing your research protocol.
Absolutely.
And you had so poorly designed it. Now that even the remotest interest that someone could have had in your thesis is gone because you've designed the study so poorly. Then you end up fabricating data, falsifying data, which is horrendous. Which is just bloody horrendous.
So thesis, I think the thesis part should go away. Either it should go away from the curriculum itself, or or they should dedicate some part of the 3-year residency to formation of a proper how to do a research kind of thing.
So like a lot of the American residencies actually have a year or 2 years dedicated to research. So that, I mean, you could argue that we don't want to increase their residency length, but you could argue for a couple of months at least, just to do some research work. There's an abundance of data available in our teaching hospitals. It's just not mined properly. The data needs to be mined properly.
Yeah, like Bitcoin. Sorry, bad.
But I think it's far from happening.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to now talk about, do we have any more comments, by the way? A few of you guys have unmuted yourselves. So if you have something to say, otherwise we'll move on to the next part of this. No one?
Yes, let's do that. Let's move on. Yep.